We welcome you to another edition of Economic Forum, a program where we discuss various issues affecting our economy in Zimbabwe, be they in agriculture, in mining, be they in industry, be they in education and culture, and many other aspects. My name is John Masuku. The book publishing industry has been affected by the internet in recent decades. This has resulted in many books being available on the internet without going through the shops. And one wonders how the publishers then benefit and become sustainable. These are some of the issues we're going to be discussing with Masimba Madondo, our guest today. Welcome to Economic Forum.
Thank you, Mr. Masuku. It's a pleasure to be here.
You are a publisher in your own right, besides being the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Book Publishing Association. Tell us how the industry is at the moment in Zimbabwe.
Let me start by saying there are pros and cons to anything really. And the advent of the internet has brought its own benefits to publishers as well as some very detrimental effects. So when you look at the positives, what the internet has done has opened doors to publishers and brought opportunities beyond the print book, as well as looking outside the conventional ways of creating books and distributing them.
And that's also happening here in Zimbabwe.
Correct.
So that it presents a different overview than what we had in the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Very true.
So where do we stand now?
So where we stand now, though, is I think this new economy or this new digital era, if I can use that term, has brought with it some aspects of new business models. We also have to look at the new consumer behavior that has come through from the advent of the digital era. One of the major issues, which you have alluded to now, is the distribution of the books. They no longer go through bookshops. And more accurately, actually, they go through bookshops, but there are other avenues. And those leakages are causing problems in terms of the sustainability of the publishing industry. What I wanted to do, though, however, if you allow me, is just to give you a brief overview of the publishing industry from a business point of view. Because when you look at it, it is a business after all. Publishers make books, they have costs that go into creating those books, and they have to realize profits after all of that. At the end of that, we also have the consumer, who is a key part in that value chain. Now, when you look at the publishing industry, it has different sectors within it. You have educational publishers and you have trade publishers. Educational publishers are predominantly the most, prominent kind of publisher, not just in Zimbabwe, but in Africa and a lot of developing countries. And the reason for this is because they are funded, and by funded I mean there's a clear channel of funding that's based on a need,
there's a ready market.
Exactly, there's a ready market of people who want to pass exams.
Which is why many authors really want to make sure that there are books that they're writing are approved as set books.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. So let me break down the industry then, because you've brought up something that's very interesting there. There are writers who write their books and submit them to the Ministry of Education for approval so that they could be used as set books in schools. And this is the ready market that we're referring to. Now you find because of that ready market, the majority of publishers are educational publishers. And how educational publishing works is a publisher goes into the market to look for writers based on the curriculum or syllabus. And usually those writers are practitioners of specific learning areas. So if you want to write a mathematics book, you go and look for you commission mathematics writers. So that's a very easy sort of chain to work with. But then when you look at the trade publishing, which is where your novels come in, your magazines and those sort of publications, it's a little more different. The market is not as ready. We have an issue of a reading culture that no longer exists, not just in Zimbabwe, but across the world. So the general state of the publishing industry is that trade publishing is suffering from a lack of genuine readers or genuine customers who are willing to part with their dollar to purchase a book through the correct channels. So you find writers are not making money from their publications. Aspiring writers are not encouraged to write. And the publishers that do exist, like the educational publishers, cannot take on trade publishing because it's not economically viable.
While you are there, Masimba, an interesting point. Right. There used to be the Literature Bureau, which used to feed into you as private publishers and encouraged a lot of Zimbabweans to write books. In fact, most of the books that were published in the early 60s, 70s, and even up to the 80s were published through the Literature Bureau and then sent over to you as private publishers. Do you think what you are saying also brought about this death in reading culture as well as publishing the trade books?
Right. So I think the Literature Bureau played a really good part there, a very big part. And unfortunately, because of its demise, there has not been the promotion of reading that you'd expect. And as I said before, unfortunately, the priority of educational publishers at this point is to create material for the curriculum. So it's my wish, it's my hope that the players within the industry, outside just the Zimbabwe Book Publishers Association, come together to revive something like the Literature Bureau. There are external factors, of course, that have affected reading culture outside of that, but it's good to have a body that actually promotes the reading culture, promotes writing, promotes the distribution of specifically locally written books.
Are you happy with the media that it's also helping you as publishers just to sample some of the books that are out so that they promote a reading culture, especially when they do book reviews as well as book reading on air and so forth?
So I've listened to a few shows on radio where that has happened. I've come across a few events where organizations are promoting local books, but it's not enough. I think it's the responsibility of several partners to come in and promote writers' books. At this point, it's just not enough.
Masimba Madondo, our guest today on Economic Forum, we are discussing the Zimbabwe book publishing industry. He's a publisher in his own right and also chairperson of the Zimbabwe Book Publishing Association. Join us in the second segment. We are now in the second segment of Economic Forum, where today we are discussing book publishing, the book publishing industry and its contribution to the economy. And our guest is Masimba Madondo, who is the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Book Publishing Association, who is sharing some ideas and trends that have taken place in their industry in recent years. But let's revisit the issue of a reading culture, which you mentioned that it's a bit low and you're only making some gains because of the educational books. Where did we get it wrong or where did we lose it? Because traditionally, as Africans, as Zimbabweans, we were interested in storytelling. And these books tell a lot of stories. The Tamba Uga Mwanangu, Karikuga Kumiremi Seve, Ugutunja Uga Suguzugutuma, and so forth. So what has happened, Masimba?
I think you have to look at it as from the angle of the book is only a vehicle at the end of the day, a medium. And what's really changing is that element of storytelling is perhaps not as vibrant as it used to be. What we're seeing a lot in the media is people are interested in gossip. People are interested in interpersonal communications through the internet, which you can see through platforms like Twitter and Instagram and such. So that's sort of taking away attention from people, from the readers. It's also taking away, or at least moving the culture from a place where people could sit down as a group, as a family, share stories that can be passed down. Then, as they're passed down, the vehicles are also available to pass that on further. So you have television, you have radio, and then you have books. So that has, I think, been taken over by a culture where we in Zimbabwe, I think, are very more interested in the gossip element of things, tabloids and that sort of thing.
So with that in mind, with that observation that you've just made, how are you then infusing your marketing so that books are also brought into it? And in this gossip era or in the internet era, you also bring in this interest in reading books.
Right. So I think the marketing is there through those same channels, these same Twitters, Instagrams. But what you find though, which is I think specific to Zimbabwe in this context, is the economics of things. Is books are expensive. They are hard to reach for the average Zimbabwean. So you find, I believe, it becomes a luxury to buy a book. So people would rather find other ways of telling stories or engaging with those stories. And I believe what we actually need is an integrated approach where music, film, and books, literature sort of converge. If we have a story being told via film, it's merchandised it's also extended through books. But we haven't reached that yet, but I think we are in a space of growth. I'd like to speak to the new curriculum, actually. The new curriculum has brought a lot of opportunities now for some of these elements to come into the school system, which allows a grassroots approach of appreciation of the arts, for example. Then the parental network also then appreciates. Then the mass market then appreciates. So what I'm seeing going forward is that as learners appreciate visual and performing arts, and this is a learning area now, which is actually examined at grade 7, as they appreciate the visual and performing arts, they also understand how to express themselves through those arts. The parents then support that. The system in general then supports us. I think we're creating a system that will work in the future. I think we're sort of starting from scratch almost, because at this point we only speak or refer to writers who were prominent in the 90s, and very few after 2000 up until now. So what we're trying to do, I think, as an industry, is to bring awareness of
the current writers.
Correct, yeah.
Very interesting. But also, as part of your marketing in the book industry, you've come up with audio books as well as other types of books. I think you've mentioned some of them. How is that doing in terms of sustainability, in terms of growing your industry?
All right. So, as an idea, as a concept, there's a lot of buy-in. The market seems to have a demand for it. But on the ground, in terms of actual sales, very far from that concept. So that gap has to be bridged, and that involves understanding consumer behavior and then aligning it with the technology and the internet, so that publishers and writers reach their audience and have the audience purchase a book or access the book in a way that's easy for them and affordable. You find in mature markets and in developed countries that took off, and it's very viable business. And one of the reasons why that has worked well there in terms of monetizing that business is that they have very strict laws around intellectual property. And there's a culture as well around the use of the internet to access that content or that material, which in Zimbabwe I think is still developing. I think our culture online, like I said, is mostly for communicating. The internet is used for communication, interpersonal communication, and we need to train ourselves to access books and to go through the steps that are required to access material online in order to get to those. So from the commercial side, looking at the industry from a publisher's or a writer's point of view, I think some discipline in terms of laws around copyright are quite important in fostering the building of a book culture in Zimbabwe, or sort of growing book culture in Zimbabwe, because right now we have rampant piracy online and offline.
When we come back in the third and final segment, we'll start it off from there on the piracy and the copyright. That is Masimba Madondo, who is the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Book Publishing Association, who is our guest today on Economic Forum. So join us in the third and final segment of the program. We are now in the third and final segment of Economic Forum, where today we have been discussing book publishing. In the last segment, we had started on copyright and piracy, and these are some of your headaches, Masimba, in the book publishing industry. Are they rampant? How are you dealing with them?
Right. Yes, it is definitely a huge issue for the industry. And we have, over the years, as an association, come up with strategies to curb piracy. I use the word curb because it's difficult to completely eradicate. But those have come with some challenges. The major challenge has been, firstly, an issue of understanding from our stakeholders of what publishing is, of what copyright is, of what intellectual property is, which has made it difficult to enforce the copyright law, or have an understanding from the public as to how to respect those laws. The second challenge we had was the alignment of the, legal system, the punishment for someone who has infringed copyright has been rather light. So there's no real deterrent from copyright. The third aspect, as I mentioned earlier, is the economics around everything, the cost of books. Because of the cost of the book, when a cheap alternative is presented to the market, obviously the market draws to that cheap alternative. Unfortunately, what that does, it affects the entire value chain that's involved in the creation of a book and the entire industry. I'll break that down a little bit by basically describing how a book is published. So what you have, and I'll start with the educational publishing. You have the publisher who does research based on the curriculum that has been set by the Ministry of Education. They commission writers. That commissioning itself has costs to it. Commissioning is pretty much putting together experts, writers, teachers, and selecting the best people for that. And from there, they come up with a manuscript. So you find the commissioning itself costs a publisher. Then from commissioning, we have the actual writing. The writers have to be paid or compensated for their writing. That process itself has its costs.
And it's factored into the cost of the book if it is going through the normal channels.
Precisely.
Yeah. But if it is outside the door of the bookshop, it's something different.
It's something completely different.
Yes.
So the entire chain has costs involved. We have writers, artists. So some of the illustrations you see in books, those people are paid for those illustrations. Photographs. On the issue of copyright and intellectual property, you cannot just take a photograph from the internet and put it in a book. You have to pay for that. Or you pay for a photographer to do original photographs. All that is put together by a professional, we call it typesetter, who then sets the book that is arranged in order, and all of that. From the typesetting stage, it goes back to editing, where editors look at accuracy, they look at language, appropriateness of, especially in the terms of textbooks, appropriateness of language and whatever is in that book, and the images. And once all of that is done, it goes to a proofreader. Proofreaders then look over what the editor has done. From there, it goes to the Ministry of Education for approval. Along all of these steps, there's money coming out.
So the final price of that book factors all these things.
All of that.
Yes.
There's one step that's left, the actual printing of the book. So all the steps I've spoken about now are all pre-printing, pre-press. That's where, if you're going to do an ebook, for example, you then channel it towards the technology for an ebook for distribution. But for printing, that's outsourced in most cases to an external printer. So most publishers don't print themselves. So printing is a separate service that is outsourced. And that printing costs also. And that's actually the major cost of a book. So out of, say, $10 for a book, between $5 and $8 goes to printing. Then 10% goes as royalties.
So from what you've said, Masimba, then I'm sure as an association, you must have been doing something in order to tighten these copyright laws so that you remain viable. What is it that you've been doing in order to survive?
Right. So what we've been doing so far, which has not worked, unfortunately, as I said, is we've partnered with the Home Affairs several times to conduct raids. And these raids would be perhaps in the streets where we find perpetrators who are then arrested, and we go through all those legal sort of steps. But unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, the results have not been, we have not really seen the results from that. However, what we're trying to do now as a first step, which is why I'm glad to be on this program, is education for our stakeholders to understand what the value of publishing
in fact, having said that, you can also embrace in the Zimbabwe International Book Fair, because it is part of your education as we wind up this program.
Precisely. So the International Book Fair, Zimbabwe International Book Fair, actually has also seen its better days. And we are hoping that as they're regrouping and growing, they'll also address the issue of piracy. The Zimbabwe International Book Fair Association is actually a collection of different book-related organizations. So you have your authors' organizations involved there, you have your Book Publishers Association there, you have your Booksellers Association, all under the ZIBFA. So the idea is if we can now have a unity of focus, and with the support of Parliament, who we are going to lobby for taking piracy and intellectual property seriously in Zimbabwe. Yeah.
Well, that's Masimba Madondo, who is the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Book Publishers Association. We have been talking about all matters to do with books, our reading culture, as well as the evolving trends involving the internet, which have affected our reading culture as well as the availability of books. Masimba, I would like to thank you very much for coming on to Economic Forum.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yes. Until next time on Economic Forum, this is John Masugu on behalf of the production crew.